Wow, we've got folks from all over the country joining us today, so it's really exciting to see. I'm going to go ahead and kick it off, and just first with a welcome and a thank you for joining us this afternoon for our celebration of Pride and the LGBTQ plus veterans who have served this country and have continued that service as community-based leaders. I know there's a lot of places you could be spending your afternoon, and the fact that you're choosing to spend it here with us is really gratifying. For those of you that I don't know or have not yet met, I'm Laura Lesperance, and I'm the Senior Vice President for External Affairs at The Mission Continues. I've been with this organization for just over 8 years, and I'm really proud to be a part of this event today. While we're certainly missing our annual Pride event, service campaigns, parades, social events because of COVID, we wanted to be really intentional about how we came together to recognize the significance of the people and the milestones and the traditions that all of those Pride celebrations represent. The Mission Continues aspires to be an organization where everyone, our team, our veterans, our volunteers, our guests, our partners, always feel welcome and safe to bring their authentic selves to this work. We're certainly living in tumultuous times right now, and we're thrilled that we could come together and really just share this space and be a part of a really positive and important conversation today. You know, at The Mission Continues, we believe strongly that dialogue leads to understanding, and understanding leads to change. And together we hope that while we listen to each other for understanding and lift each other up and amplify our voices, we will see this sort of transformative progress in the fight for equality and equity that we all deserve and desire at this point. I know some of you participated on Thursday evening, had a chance to hear some really powerful stories, and I expect you're gonna walk away today even more inspired, humbled, and motivated. So first, I want to acknowledge a few people that worked really hard to bring us together this evening. As you may have heard before, or heard us say before, the vision for The Mission Continues is for all veterans with a desire to continue their service to be part of a movement to transform communities. And the way we view it, part of creating a movement rather than a moment is to make sure that there's a place for leaders to be able to step up and speak up and take action. And I'm just so proud that 2 alumni from our service leadership program came to our team with this brilliant and innovative idea to both celebrate our LGBTQ network and to deepen our understanding of the history and progress and issues that are central to the lived experience of our LGBTQ teammates and colleagues. So huge thank you to Bree Gaudette. Bree is an Army veteran. I consider them a TMC triple threat. They're an alumni of our fellowship program, our service leadership corps, and our mass deployment. So Bree, you may not see Bree on screen, but they're here. So thank you for servicing this idea and continuing engagement and leadership with TMC. I also want to thank Jennifer Dane, who you should see on your screen, also an SLC alumni, for your support and really for putting the weight of MMAA behind this event. Jennifer is an Air Force veteran and currently serves as the interim executive director of the Modern Military Association of America. And for those of you who didn't click through that link and see, as our co-host today, they're the nation's largest nonprofit organization working to advance fairness and equality for the LGBTQ military and veteran community. So thank you very much to the 2 of you for really being our inspiration for this. Also want to acknowledge 2 of my team members, Talisa Keel, who is our Director of Alumni Engagement, and Mandy Sue, who's our Service Year Fellow. They just made sure all of these details came together, and we just couldn't have pulled this off without y'all, so thank you very much. So I'm gonna get to some logistics before we kick everything off. So a quick rundown of what you can expect. We're gonna start with a panel of distinguished speakers, and Jennifer's gonna introduce them and the moderator today. Really trailblazers, activists, and they're gonna have a moderated discussion of experiences, which I think you're gonna find really fascinating. I know reading the background, I was I'm very interested to hear the story. It's pretty fascinating. So following the panel discussion, we'll have a short Q&A. We'll take a quick break at that point, and we'll come back to split up into our breakout room groups. There's a return link that you should have in both the reminder and the invite that you saw, which will bring you back to the breakout sessions. You had a chance to select from 3 choices. So there's allyship, there's the current landscape of military service, and then there's coming out / pronouns. Don't worry if you didn't pre-select, we can do that remotely, and all of that will be available in the comment box. And then we'll get back together and wrap up and reflect on the discussion for the day. So again, grateful for your participation, grateful for your continued support of TMC. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer, who's going to introduce our panel and get everything kicked off.
Thank you so much, Laura, and the Mission Continues for providing a space for us to showcase the past, the present, and also honoring the pride, and also the pride and honor that we have today to be able to celebrate today. I especially, like you mentioned, want to thank Talisa, excuse me, and her team for working with us and helping us provide these amazing panelists. So like Laura said, my name is Jennifer Dane, and I'm the Interim Executive Director for the Modern Military Association of America. We were formed through the merger of the American Military Partner Association, which I had the amazing pleasure of getting to meet Eric Fanning there, and as a speaker, and also the OutServe SLDN that did a huge legislative push whenever we were looking at Don't Ask, Don't Tell and some prior legislation. So like you said, the Modern Military Association is the nation's largest LGBT organization dedicated to advancing fairness and equality for the LGBT military and veteran community. Through education, advocacy, and support, we try to make a real difference, and we do every day in the lives of LGBTQ service members, military spouses, veterans, and families. Simply, what we do, we make sure that we ensure that all who can and are able to serve have the ability to do so. So I was really honored that the Mission Continues reached out to us, and really truly honored by Cindy and her amazing documentary team. Cindy's going to be able to moderate for us. She is an award-winning producer director, and she also writes, and she wrote this amazing, she worked with these amazing colonels to provide the Surviving the Silence. And I'll let her go into more of her background there, but I know that she knew the importance of having positive role models, and I wanted to say thank you so much for that, Cindy, because I myself served under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and was investigated, and it's amazing to see that I'm not the only one that happened to. Not so much the trauma, but that there's some allyship in that. I'm so thankful for both the colonels, Colonel Cammermeyer and Colonel Thompson, for being here and sharing your story, because it's in your stories and the history that really makes a huge difference in the lives of the younger generation of service members, and also sets us on a path. And lastly, before I'll introduce Eric Fanning, he served as the 22nd Secretary of the Army and the 24th Undersecretary of the Air Force, which I had the pleasure of serving under him whenever I was in the Air Force. He was the first openly gay head of service in the United States military, and he was able to really successfully use his position legislatively and just having an open presence, and we just so much appreciate that. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to Cindy. And I just want to remind you, we have some amazing panelists after the Q&A too, that I would love to introduce you to, and they're also on the call. But Cindy, you can go ahead and take over.
You're muted, Cindy.
How's that? Okay, take 2. You know, we have to do several takes when we're filming, so my apologies to everyone. Jennifer, thank you so much for the invitation, and also to Laura and to Lisa from the Mission Continues. And both organizations are so fantastic, and we so appreciate your invitation and your warm welcome. And today, hopefully, we can put together just a nice conversation with some of the folks who were really instrumental and who served at various stages under the 5 different policies that the United States has had for military service. You know, first the executive order under Eisenhower, who said, that's it, official ban on homosexuals in the military. And then the Don't Ask, Don't Tell, then the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, then the lifting of the ban on transgender members, and then now I guess somewhat of a ban on transgender members. And a little bit later on, I'll put Eric Fanning on the spot and ask for his opinion on the current Supreme Court's ruling banning employment discrimination and how that may or may not impact the military. But for now, I'd like to start our conversation with Colonel Patsy Thompson. We tell her story in our film Surviving the Silence, where we get to see how she and her now wife Barbara Brass of 36 or 7 years, how they had to hide their relationship in order to protect her military career and still found a way to keep their love alive, which to me is just amazing. And I know that Colonel Cammermeyer and her wife Diane also have a similar story with regard to that. But in our film, we also see where Colonel Thompson and Colonel Cammermeyer's stories really collide, and the difficult decisions that they had to make. At the time, Colonel Thompson had just come back, or had just finished a 3-year tour as the first chief nurse of the Army National Guard at the Pentagon. And then following that, she went to Panama for 6 months, and all the struggles that they had to go through. But in between there was this defining moment where she didn't know that what she was doing would then play a part in repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So let's back up a little bit and talk with Colonel Thompson. How are you, Colonel? Can't hear you.
Happy World Pride Day.
Thank you.
Yes.
So thank you for being a part of this. We wanted to, and I believe you're in your uniform as always. Thank you so much for that, for your ongoing service. What was the policy towards homosexuals when you first joined the military, and why did you want to serve so much that you were willing to do whatever it took to do so?
Well, it was illegal for homosexuals to serve, and I knew that. But I also, at the same time, I felt very strongly that the job that I could do was a lot more important than my sexual life. So my brother had been killed in World War II. He was a Navy pilot. And so I wanted to serve in honor of his death. So that was one reason that I wanted to join the military. That was a very strong influence in my life.
Right. Okay, great. And so you knew when you went in that you were going to have to hide who you were.
Yes, I did know that. And for all those years, I did do that. For 37 and a half years, I was not able to be who I was.
Okay, so I guess around year 35 is when you started facing your biggest challenge, right? So we'll go ahead and show a clip from the film that talks about when Colonel Thompson's world was about to crash into Colonel Cammermeyer's world. So, Talisa, I think you're queuing that up.
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you.
In 1992, I received a call from California State Headquarters. I was asked if I would go to Washington State to preside over a federal recognition board. They needed a colonel for that job. And I thought, well, maybe Colonel Cammermeyer isn't available because she was their state chief nurse. So a few days later, I get a large cardboard box in the mail, opened it, and it is full of classified information. And so I take out papers and start looking at them and realize what that federal recognition board is really about.
So, Colonel Thompson, as you received that box, I know that of classified documents, I know that that had to be just an incredible shock. What were your feelings around all of that?
My feelings were, I'm not going to do this. No, I will not do that to her. So I called state headquarters and told them that I was not going to go.
Mm-hmm.
Said, okay, we'll let them know. And then they called me back in a few days and told me that Colonel Cammermeyer had requested that I serve her board on her board. And I said, okay, if she wants me to go, then I will go. And
so at the time, why did you choose to not come out and say, well, you're kicking her out? My story is pretty much the same.
Well, because then there would have been two of us kicked out. And I did not want to be kicked out. So, but I wanted to support her as much as I could. So I tried to put the board off until her team were ready. And I kept getting calls from the general's office. Some captain would call about every day and say, okay, you've got to get that board going. The general wants that done right away. And I'd say, oh yeah, sure, we're working on that. So I put that off until they were ready. So I was happy that I could do that for them.
So I know there were some things that you were really wanting to have because she could have received a dishonorable discharge, right?
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about the process that she, in fact, didn't get dishonorably discharged.
I was up all night, the last night of the board, and I was trying to decide what to say when I had to take her federal recognition. And because that was a very difficult thing to do. So I discussed everything with the board members, and I told them, they kept taking away and saying no for things that I had written. And I said, okay, I'll give that up, but I'm going to hold on to this, that if in the future the regulations change, that this case will be relooked. So I got to keep that in.
Okay, great. So that's a lead in to Colonel Cammermeyer. And before we start talking with her, Talisa, if you will go ahead and play the clip that introduces her.
Lisa, I think we need to unmute. Can't hear it.
Yeah, if you could start it over, please, unmuted.
My apologies. Try this again.
Okay, thank you.
I had had this dream about wanting to be a general, and there were a few openings now coming up for female generals in the Nurse Corps, and I thought maybe I could do that. And I applied for a top secret clearance. As part of the investigation, there was some question about sexuality, and I made the statement, I am a lesbian. 6 months later, I was called into my commander's office in the National Guard, and they said, because of the statement that you made during your top secret investigation, the Army is going to start discharge proceedings against you.
Wow. So, Colonel Cammermeyer, welcome. Tell us a little bit about why you chose to come out. I mean, surely you must have known that you were putting your career on the line.
I had this delusion of grandeur that I was so old and so good and so educated, had served in Vietnam and was, you know, had such a career path that I had taken to get there, that of course the military in its greater wisdom would not discharge me from the military. At the same time, I was not about to lie, because I had just about a year before met Diane and had my aha moment and realized that I must be a lesbian. And so I was not going to jeopardize honesty and not have full disclosure when I was applying for this top secret clearance and wanting to, you know, be a general, go to the Pentagon where Colonel Thompson had been, and just follow in her footsteps.
So, like so many, as we know, you were kicked out. So many who were kicked out were never reinstated. So how is it that it came to be that you actually were, after several years, you were able to rejoin at your same rank? How did that happen?
Well, I mean, it is curious. Some people are discharged in 24 hours. It took 2 years for the National Guard to, you know, move forward with my discharge, because nobody wanted it to happen. And so there was always a reason to delay having a physical or having an investigation. And so it took a while. And then finally, there was pressure on my commander that if he didn't start discharge proceedings against me, that they would start discharge proceedings against him. And that can, you know, sort of act as an incentive. And, you know, I had been in the military at that time for 25 years, and I could have just resigned and, you know, gone away as though nothing had happened. But in the course of my 25 years in the service, other people had stood up to change the policies so that women could continue to serve in the military regardless of their marital status, regardless of whether or not they had children. And it seemed to me that, you know, this was my opportunity now to make a difference. And I thought that I truly did think that they would decide that this was a bad policy. And at the same time, you know, my attorneys by that time had tried to reason with me that there was no option other than to move forward within the military, be discharged, and then go into federal court. And to have that process take place so that we could go to federal court, we had to have a solid military case so that all of the records would be there to be able to file the appeal. And that's where the significance of Colonel Thompson giving us enough time to have the affidavits, to have the information, to have everything that we needed to be able to go into federal court, and how significant that was in allowing that process to take place.
So in between, while you were waiting, after you'd been honorably discharged, and you were waiting for the civil court to happen, how did you spend your time? Did you just go home and try to, you know, get out of the spotlight that you hadn't wanted to be in to start with? Or what did you do?
Well, there are two things. One is, you know, I was in the National Guard at the time. I had a full-time job at the Veterans Hospital. I was a clinical nurse specialist in neuroscience. I ran a sleep lab, and so I had several hundred patients that I was seeing on a regular basis. And because of the notoriety around my case, I ended up getting an agent who said, let's, you know, tell your story. And so I ended up giving university talks, about 125 of them. And in the course of one of those talks at Davis University was when I had sort of the shock of my life. And I can wait with that, or I can follow through and tell the rest of the story there if you want.
No, please go ahead.
Okay, so I was at UC Davis doing my spiel talking about not only my discharge, but the effect of this anti-gay policy that the military had. And after my talk, this woman comes up to me and hands me a business card. And it says, Barbara Brass and Patsy Thompson. And I was stunned. I had no idea that Patsy was a lesbian. And, you know, it was just this flood of, my gosh, what a horrible situation I had put her in, asking that she be on the board, and that ultimately resulted in my discharge.
Yeah, that had to be quite a shock.
Yeah, it was.
To go through that. And from what I understand, that was also the beginning of eventually Colonel Thompson realizing that she had actually played a very important role in what you had done. So that brings us up to, let's see, when you were reinstated, was that Don't Ask, Don't Tell, or not quite?
Yes, I was discharged before Don't Ask, Don't Tell. President Clinton had said that he would overturn that policy as a regulation, and then hit the wall, and we ended up with Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And I should add that in the midst of the beginning of the notoriety around my case, I did get a phone call from Barwood Studios, just happened to be, you know, Barbara Streisand's studio, and asking if I would be interested in having my life story told on television to 25 million people. And I said, no, not particularly. And then they convinced me that she said that she thought that it was the most important social issue of that decade, and ended up then with Serving in Silence as the movie sort of depicting my discharge from the military. Okay, so I just wanted to ask you, you testified during that time in Congress, right? About Don't Ask, Don't Tell? Yeah, I had a little encounter with Warner and Lieberman and Strom Thurmond, and you know, it was suggested that perhaps I should try therapy. And you know, it was a tense time and yet, you know, the only way you had an opportunity to change people's idea about who we were was to become real to them in terms of the work that we did, our commitment to the country, and that we were just like everyone else. Okay. So that brings us up to when Eric Fanning starts joining the Defense Department. So let's go ahead and play his clip, please, Talisa, and then we'll talk with him a little bit more about his military career path and how that lined up with policy.
I first got involved in government professionally coming into the Clinton administration. I wasn't out at the time. I wasn't planning on serving the military. I had to get a security clearance. Those days, being gay was still grounds for denying you the clearance. So it was a big deal that you had this candidate campaigning to end the ban on the military. This compromise, Don't Ask, Don't Tell, is very quickly created, because even though the president had talked about this during the campaign, the political will wasn't there. That ends up having been a pretty bad compromise, because it puts people in the position of having to hide who they are. And it still allowed the system to go after people, not just if someone revealed who they were, even though the asking was technically prohibited by this. If they wanted to go after someone, they could find ways to get the information without it looking like it was an investigation. It took 20 years of deciding whether we should get past the idea of banning gays and lesbians to create this awful compromise. Almost 20 years of living under Don't Ask, Don't Tell before it's repealed. So you got 4 decades there of humanizing this, of personalizing this, and of culture changing in our country.
5 years after the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, Fanning becomes the first openly gay secretary of a major military branch.
It's very different now than it used to be.
Thank you. So, Secretary Fanning, tell us a little bit about your career path and how you went from, as you said, when you first started at the Department of Defense, being in the closet, to becoming eventually the first out gay man, which became your first name, who got to serve in all these different positions, culminating with being the 22nd Secretary of the Army. Tell us a little bit about that.
First of all, you have to call me Eric. Cindy and I have known each other for way more years than I want to admit, but I first showed up in Washington on the House Armed Services Committee working for Les Aspin, who became Clinton's first Secretary of Defense, who's in one of those photographs. So I arrived in Washington before Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and in the Pentagon when Don't Ask, Don't Tell is created, come out during the Clinton administration and then decide to leave government together because I didn't think there was another gay person in the entire 25,000 person Pentagon, which of course is a ridiculous thing to think. But found my way back because I missed it. Came into the Obama administration. Don't Ask, Don't Tell still exists. It's a really weird feeling. It doesn't impact civilians directly, but you're nonetheless working in a large institution that discriminates. And Obama had pledged in his campaign to get rid of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And it was almost the very end of his first 2 years when we were about to lose the Senate. And he persevered, pushed through, and we got rid of Don't Ask, Don't Tell because I was afraid I was going to have to leave again. And I just meandered my way through a few jobs. I was in the Navy Department, then the Air Force Department, and then the Chief of Staff to Secretary Carter, who swore me in there. And then the Secretary of the Army, the previous Secretary of the Army, decided to step down, and they put me in that spot.
So tell us a little bit about what it was like when you were working with, was he Secretary Ash Carter? And he was considering whether or not lifting the ban or just basically allowing transgender members to serve openly.
So most people in the country, I don't think, understood that Don't Ask, Don't Tell was just lesbian and gay. It didn't include transgender. Obviously, inside the building, when we were able to get past Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the generals and the admirals they knew this was going to be what's next. We had put the military through a lot of important and long overdue change. And you Don't Ask, Don't Tell, opening up all positions to women, religious accommodations for Muslims and Sikhs. There were a number of things we did. And the White House was clear they wanted us to get rid of the transgender ban, but I think they feared that maybe they had asked too much of us already. And we're on the first trip that Secretary Carter took just days after he'd been sworn in. We go into theater in Afghanistan, and we're in this remote hangar in Kandahar, and someone gets up and says, "What's your position on transgender deployment in remote locations?" And I was exhausted and dusty, and but I just remember hearing transgender, and that woke me up fast. And Carter just gave his answer, which is, anybody who meets the requirements should be able to serve. And I'm thinking, well, here we go. This one moment of, it turns out, a gay Navy doctor sitting next to a transgender airman asking this question was the spark that got it started. And we came back, and I think everybody in the Pentagon was expecting it, but didn't really know what to do with it. But we dove in and figured it out, and in my view, had it settled and solved before the transition to the current administration.
So you've seen a lot of change from the beginning of your career to where we were, at least at that time. Talk a little bit about when President Trump decided to put a ban on transgender service, how that actually impacted folks who were already in the military and versus those who wanted to join the service. And then also talk a little bit about the latest Supreme Court ruling.
Well, we had, in my view, figured everything out, but didn't have the time to fully implement the change. There's a lot that goes into making a change like that. that to include, policies, directives, and perhaps even more importantly, training. So when that tweet occurred, everyone's first reaction was, is that actually a presidential directive? We hadn't had previous presidents communicate important things like that via tweet before. And it put a lot of people in limbo, and they're still in limbo. And while they reviewed the policy, lawsuits were filed, which are taking, there are 4 big lawsuits right now. All the Obama service secretaries are involved in those. We had deposition schedules before the pandemic hit. But it puts a lot of people in transition. But the current rule essentially is that they won't assess, that is to bring in people who are transgender. Those that are in there already are in limbo, and they don't really know what's going to happen to them going forward. Now, I'm not a lawyer. Didn't really know you were going to ask this question about the lawsuit, but I will just say, or the Supreme Court ruling, it doesn't address the status of the military as an employer. So it's not sure what, it's not really clear what the direct impact is. But all 4 of those transgender cases that were filed federally, the judges granted injunctions for the discharge of those 4 people based on sex as the discriminator. And that's what's the key part of the Supreme Court ruling. So everything I'm seeing says that this ruling on employment discrimination will impact the military and transgender service very favorably for transgender Americans.
So what do you think has brought about this change that you've witnessed and been a part of over your career?
Well, I think, I said it in the clip, it's 40 years of humanizing this. We have these debates about whether or not someone should be allowed to serve, when really in every single instance, people are already serving. And we're really just talking about catching policy up with the reality of what's existing. And in some ways, the military leads that. But it's society moving forward, culture moving forward, and the military moving forward. And it is that humanization process. And Greta mentioned it as well. Each person being authentic, and being able to live their lives with integrity and showing what that means wins people over. I mean, you can take a half a dozen transgender service members of a service, sit them down at lunch with their service chief, which we did, and it changes everything, because they see these people in their uniform, the uniform of their service, and they think of them as soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines first. And so I think the most important thing is everybody who took these steps to come out and serve and set an example and build allies who then were helping from the inside is really what made this, I think, possible, because the more people who knew LGBT people in uniform that were serving with them, the more they were changing hearts and minds. Okay.
So we talked about policy change and the impact that different folks have had. What about societal change? Can one person really have an impact? Colonel Cammermeyer, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think sometimes you don't know that you've made an impact. One of my daughters-in-law told me that her son, our grandson, was playing baseball, and one of his buddies was being harassed because they figured out that he was gay. And my grandson stood up for him and said, there's nothing wrong about being gay, and you can be my roommate anytime we're traveling. And the boy's mother said that because of my grandson's action, her son did not commit suicide, which was the impact that just, you don't even realize that as soon as you have somebody who understands that we're just like somebody else, they become an advocate also. So I think there is a profound ripple effect. And, I get teary whenever I relate that story, because I had no idea how us living our lives in truth made a difference in his upbringing.
Wow. Yeah, I get chills when you were telling that story as well. That's so powerful. And I know, Colonel Thompson, you and your wife, Barbara, have been, ever since you first came out, and I was fortunate enough to be in that audience, you and Barbara have, been giving speeches, and she started a resistance organization, and you've been talking with the media. Tell us a little bit about your experience with that and some of the feedback that you've gotten.
Yeah, Barbara and I have told our story 20 sometimes to different civic organizations, to churches, colleges, schools, and we have become activists. We are supporting Planned Parenthood. We have been protesting for 3.5 years, a group that Barbara started called the Rat Pack. And we have been out there 2 times a week protesting in front of our McClintock's office, our representative in Washington, because of his way of that he doesn't even live in our district. He does nothing for his constituents. So we have been out there protesting that for 3.5 years.
What's some of the feedback that you've received after your speeches or after you've been in the newspaper and on television?
Yeah, well, when we first gave our speech, we were met at the bottom of the stairs by probably 6 or 8 young women with tears flowing down their cheeks saying, "We're so sorry that you had to endure that." But with the speeches that we give, the people are ask a lot of questions, and they're interested because so many of them don't have any idea some of the struggles that some of the LGBT military people have had to endure. So we just felt good about being able to get out there and tell that story to the different groups.
Okay. And then Eric, any thoughts on what each of us can do regardless? You know, some folks who are listening, watching to this are on active duty. Others are veterans. Others, like myself, have never served in the military. What can we do? You know, there's obviously things that need to happen, not only in the military, but in greater society. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think first is just doing what you can to live your life authentically. It makes a big difference. And I still, you know, just because Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed doesn't mean we still don't have a lot of people serving in silence. I get a lot of people asking me about what it would mean to come out in the military. And one thing I say is, you're probably underestimating the reservoir of support that's out there, the number of allies that don't know to lash onto you unless you give them the opportunity by being true to yourself about who you are. We tend to make decisions based on the worst case scenario, you know, the 2 grumpy Muppets in the balcony. But what I found is that there's just so much goodwill out there that comes your way when they know how to find you. Secondly, I would say is, you know, create opportunities for other people. You know, be a good ally within the community where you can. And third is always to remember that there's always another community that's marginalized, facing injustice, facing discrimination. And so, you know, when you walk through the door, don't forget to hold it open for the people behind you, and think beyond just the community that's on this Zoom right now.
Okay, great. Thank you. We're going to show one last clip and then open it up to questions. So, Talisa?
There's a lot of people struggling with that question and deciding what to do. And we make those decisions based on worst case scenarios, what we fear, the reaction that we might get. In my experience, there's actually this untapped bastion of support looking for an opportunity to express itself. And so you have people that you know support you. You have people that you know will support you. But you have these people you don't even know exist that are looking for ways to support you.
Once you begin to tell your story, it impacts people.
Thompson represents what countless others, and we'll never know, had to do in order to serve their country. Even when you can serve openly, you're making enormous sacrifices that impact your family, that impact you. And to have to do it closed and not to be able to acknowledge your family, who you are. I can't think of a larger sacrifice other than the ultimate one of giving your life.
You telling your story and Barbara telling her story enables others to see that they can also. And that's, I think, what is so important. The freedom that comes with living your truth is just so emancipating that allows the door to open.
So thank you. Thank you to each of our panelists. You know, it really is an honor to be able to speak with you. And yes, Eric and I have been friends for a while now. And yet he's also been the 22nd Secretary of the Army, and both Colonel Thompson and Colonel Cammermeyer have served and been such role models for what women can do and for pushing the boundaries with regard to that, and also pushing the boundaries of what's possible and how we can stand up for each other, whether we have to be in the closet or whether we decide to come out of that closet. So thank you to each of you. And thank you again to the Mission Continues for teaming up with the Modern Military Association of America to celebrate Pride together and to have pride and to honor each other's sacrifices and to really recognize where we are in our world and how we might move forward. So with that said, let's go ahead and open it up to everyone for some questions.
Cindy, there's a question here that Sherry posted to all the panelists. She wants to know, are the uniformed senior leaders aware of the issues regarding obstacles for trans service members facing who face obtaining health care and assignment limitation?
Eric, why don't you talk a little bit about that, since you were you know, really involved in those early conversations with regard to open service by transgender folks?
Well, I would say, first of all, it's a whole new set of Joint Chiefs since I was there. It's rotated. We did do a lot of, there was a lot of deep dives into medical issues, because what we were trying to do was make this an issue between someone in uniform and his or her doctor, and try and get out of any other issues. So I would say that the uniform leaders I served with had an understanding of this. As to the current leaders, I don't know. I could only speculate that they're probably not focused on it because they have come up with a new policy, reinstituted a ban, and have probably moved on from thinking about it. But again, it's a new group of leaders, and so I don't know, not working with them, what they're thinking or what they know.
Okay. So I see there's another question here about how do you see the intersection between Black Lives Matter and our movement? How can we be good allies? And I'm going to ask that question both to Colonel Cammermeyer and to Colonel Thompson, because I know that certainly with the Rat Pack and different groups that you've been speaking with, Colonel Thompson, it's certainly not just about LGBT issues. And can you talk a little bit about your thoughts around what is the intersection between that?
With Black Lives Matter, yes, I certainly support Black Lives Matter, and my wife also does, and I'm sure that a lot of people that are listening to this do as well. And I have served in the military with Black nurses. I actually served with a Black nurse in North Carolina when I was waiting to go into the military. And we could go down to the basement for our dinner, but she had to sit in a different room. So times have really changed, and I'm so happy that things are so much better now in certain ways. In certain ways, they're not better. So I'm hoping that with all of the media coverage recently that things are going to get better for our Black community in general. That's my hope.
Colonel Cammermeyer, any thoughts on that you'd like to add?
I don't see how we can be part of a civil society and not look out for one another regardless. I mean, in a way, part of the LGBT community, we can be hidden, live our lives in silence, and have a certain degree of protection. When you're dealing with issues of race, it is right there facing you all the time, and that there is absolutely no place for any discrimination to take place against anyone. And you know, it's brought to light. And I think what's so frustrating is that at least my experience in the military was one where we were working hand in hand with one another, regardless of sexual orientation, race, gender, whatever it happened to be. We were one family, and that really is what we are in society too. We are one family. They are our brothers and our sisters, and we need to be there and be obvious and visible for them also.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if you can see the question in the Q&A box.
Yes.
But I'd like to pose this one. As a straight civilian, how can I help LGBTQ veterans share their stories?
I'm gonna let the three of you decide what you think the best way is.
Well, they could ask for us to come and speak to their group. That would be one thing they could do to get the message out. We would be happy to do that.
I think that's one of the things that, well, frankly, each of you have touched upon, right? Is that the more LGBTQ folks share their stories, the more lives change. And like Colonel Cammermeyer talked about was it your grandson, I believe, who, you know, was openly supportive, and he was being a good ally. And I think that, you know, that right there is one of the absolute best ways. In addition to finding more formal platforms like what Colonel Thompson was talking about, I think whether it's about sexual orientation or gender identity or race, we all need to say, you know, I don't think that was quite the best answer for that, or to interject and find some way to basically say, I disagree with the statement that you just made about whoever it is that folks were making disparaging remarks about. And so this kind of ties into that as well. What advice do you have for us as we continue to fight for social justice and equality, both in and out of the veterans military space?
Well, you know, I think one of the things that happens sometimes is we make something an issue where it shouldn't be an issue. I mean, we have straight friends and they know that we're gay, and it doesn't come up in the conversation because it doesn't need to. And, you know, one of the things that one can do is, you know, I'd like you to meet, you know, so-and-so and their spouse. And if they're both there and of the same gender, it becomes very obvious that this is already part of a relationship, and we are now part of their greater social community also. So that I don't know that one always has to make an issue of the fact that we happen to be gay, even though we ourselves may have to remind our, you know, the people that are working in the hardware store when they say to me, well, why don't you have your husband do this? And I have to say, you know, I don't have a husband, and my spouse is not very good with a screwdriver. So, you know, it's like calling them on the things that may be very natural for people to make assumptions about, but also to raise everybody's consciousness that we, you know, we don't have to be treated separately or specially. We just have to be.
Okay. And then I believe can we go ahead and take one more question, Talisa? I know we're a little bit over, but this feels kind of important.
No, it's good. I was going to give you like a 5-minute warning. I know we didn't start on time, but yeah, let's do one more question and closing remarks, and then we'll transition into the breakout session. So I'll give a few announcements for that.
Okay, great. So, Eric, I'm going to have you address this, because in working to get a variety of subjects addressed with regard to women and Sikhs, and as well as transgender folks in the military, do you see the issue with Black and POC LGBT service members staying closeted because of the intersectionality and impact of being in marginalized communities? In other words, they're not part of the quote unquote dominant culture because they're LGBT, on top of the fact that they're not white.
Well, I think it's patently clear that it's easier for some of us than others. I mean, if I'm just walking down the street, people can't tell I'm gay. If I weren't gay, I probably wouldn't be a part of any minority group. And it does get harder as you layer more things on. And so there's no question we still have a lot of work left to do. Part of what we were trying to accomplish in the 8 years of the Obama administration by opening service was actually trying to get rid of the labels and just focus on the ability to serve, meeting the requirements, to make it easier for people to be a part of the conversation. Because it was, if you want to do this job and you're capable of doing this job, you can do the job. And getting past all of the artificial barriers that have been put in place over many years, actually. And so I do think there are still communities within our own community that don't feel they have as much access to the rights and the opportunities that the rest of us have. I mean, when I was in the Pentagon in the Clinton administration, I was the only openly gay appointee. When I got to the Obama administration at the start, there was like a caucus of us in the Pentagon. And by the end of the administration, President Obama said, white, gay, cisgender men don't count as diversity anymore. We've done pretty well by you. You're okay. It's time for you to be a part of the group that's helping everybody else. And that was a powerful thing to hear your president say and think about.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks to each of you panelists, and also for coordinating all of this, Talisa, for making this conversation possible. There are several other questions that I wish we had about another 45 minutes to address, but we don't. And I want to thank all those who joined into this conversation as well, and at least listened in, and hopefully these folks have inspired you to go out and to make change in whatever venue you can. As we saw, Colonel Thompson wasn't able to be out, but at the same time, she found a way to do the best thing possible in a horrible situation, which set up the situation for Colonel Cammermeyer to then eventually be reinstated and to use her platform to speak out against Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And from there, we've also heard from former Secretary Fanning about his conversations and the relationships he was able to build on in the conversation about opening up open service to transgender folks. So we each have a role to play, I believe, and we can each find something that we can do, whether we're in the service or not, or used to be and are not now. But we can each do something to help create a more fair and equitable world. So again, I want to thank the Mission Continues and Modern Military Association of America for all that you're doing to help bring that vision to life.
Thank you so much, Cindy. And thank you all again for joining us this morning, afternoon, early afternoon, depending on which time zone you are in. You guys have definitely made such an impact today. There are so many, like Cindy said, so many great questions, and I apologize that we can't get to all of them. However, some of those questions and topics that you all are concerned about will be addressed in our breakout group facilitation. And so if you registered, you should have received an agenda. If not, I will post the Zoom link. It is a separate link from this webinar for the second part of this event, where you will have the opportunity to break out in groups. We will have a group on allyship. We will have a group on sort of the current affairs of as far as policies concerned within LGBTQ+. And we will also have a breakout group on coming out and discussing pronouns. And so you definitely do not want to miss these speakers. They were highly coveted and sent to us through the Modern Military Association of America, and some of which are also alumni of the Mission Continues. So we are very excited to support them and to provide an educational opportunity for all of us. So once again, thank you all on behalf of the Mission Continues, Modern Military Association of America for joining us this afternoon. We will take a 5-minute intermission, and I will ask that if you would like to join any of the breakout groups for the second half of this event, please refer to your agenda or click the link that I'm going to post right after this. So Colonel Thompson, Colonel Cammermeyer, Mr. Fanning, Cindy, thank you all so much for facilitating and participating in this panel. We are very grateful, and I hope to see you guys on the other end. Thank you.
Lisa, thanks. Cindy.
Thanks so much.